When you break it down like this, like we're talking about, we know the brain changes with sleep deprivation. We know there are brain changes with these exposures to screen and then with some of the content. Lassie could figure out that this is a bad combination here, but yet we seem to just keep pedaling right down the road into this, which is why I wanted to do this and have this conversation so parents understood not only does the research say that these dangers are obtaining, but it's not just correlational. If you look at the factors here, the changes in the brain, the social impact with the depression and suicide in response to the hate messages and the, why don't you just kill yourself? You're ugly, you're this, you're that. I suppose we still have to say it's correlational because we can't draw a bright red line from those messages to some 12-year-old girl attempting to take her life or actually taking her life. But it's awfully hard to ignore the juxtaposition of those experiences. And parents just have to pay attention to that. They just can't pretend that's not there.
And I think the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind, I said earlier that this has not been by accident. You have big tech and some very sophisticated people that work designing these platforms. And I think it was a blessing when we had Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower. She came out last year and she showed us the internal emails of Meta and Instagram. And their own internal research showed that these platforms were harmful to young people. Suicidality in teenage girls went up 12% in England, 6% in the US. Eating disorders were exacerbated by 17%. Their own internal research said our stuff is toxic. And the internal email dialogues were, should we change the algorithms to make them less harmful? And it was no, because the less toxic the algorithm, the less engagement. And so it was it's a similar thing to the Purdue Pharmaceuticals and OxyContin, where they knew that their product was habit forming and harmful, and yet they sold it anyway. To big tobacco, where big tobacco knew it was a carcinogen, but they marketed Joe Camel to kids anyway. So that's where I think a curse on their houses, because it's one thing if a company doesn't realize, oops, maybe our product, we didn't realize there was some harms happening, but by their own admission, these were designed to be habit forming. By their own research, they're harmful. So now you have, like it was just in the news 3 days ago, the Seattle school district is suing Meta and Snapchat for harming the mental health consciously of young people. So we as the parents should begin to sort of put up some guardrails and realize that this is a by design, well orchestrated attack on our young people. And our young people, you were saying before when you worked with some Olympic athletes who got burnout after a certain point. Well, our young people are experiencing burnout, but they're in a digital cage that big tech has trapped them in, but it's a sugar-coated cage that they like the taste of. And so they're not saying, I want to check out yet, because even though they're self-destructing and their lives are collapsing and becoming smaller and smaller, they like the taste of the cage that they're in because it's tickling that dopamine there. So they're not opting out yet.
I really wonder if B.F. Skinner and some of his colleagues could have ever foreseen how their research on locking people in and resistance to extinction, all of that was going to play out in gambling and gaming and addiction to all of this. I bet you they're turning over in their graves watching how all this is being used to program these toxic elements into these devices.
Right. Baked right in. It's baked right in. And the problem is that we as the adults, we're too busy playing Candy Crush we're also trapped in the cage too. So we're not noticing that. I mean, I've got 15-year-old twin sons, identical twin. I've got a natural twin study at home, by the way. I've got identical boys.
Yeah, you do.
And, and it's interesting. One is more, I delayed, the message I try to give parents is delay. As much as you can delay giving your children these devices, the better shot they have at having a more developed brain and social development to be able to handle them. And the more able they are to develop countervailing activities in their lives. Like you're more likely to, if you have some interest, if you're playing sports or a musical instrument and you've got a social network, you're less likely to fall prey to some of these things. So, the older a kid gets, the more likely they are to have what I call a healthy psychological immune system. But if you have a compromised psychological immune system and then this digital virus comes your way, you're gonna get snake bit.
You're so right. And I hope parents hear that. Old sayings become old sayings because they're profound. Like, you're not going to get a hit if you aren't swinging. If your child is involved in sports or choir or arts and crafts, whatever it is, and they're getting rewarded from that, they're going to be less subject to becoming dependent on something like this. I watch my grandkids, for example, and they're all involved in year-round sports, and they're into scuba diving and all these different things. And it's like, I know that they see all of these things, and I see them with these groups of friends and stuff. And I think that's really, you said it's an immune system against this because they have so many things that they get paid off from.
Right.
I kind of analogize it the other day to people talk about, the old cat woman down on the corner that just lives with 50 cats but doesn't deal with any people. It's just easier. The cats don't require her to take a shower, get dressed, get in her car, go out, meet people for dinner, have a conversation, answer questions, go back and forth. It's just easier to stay home with the cats. It's the same thing with these digital relationships. You don't have to be an interesting conversationalist. You don't have to be a good friend that's there during hard times. You aren't required to put as much effort and energy into it. You just click or don't, and you make a comment. It doesn't matter if you're in your pajamas and slippers. It's so much easier, and they don't develop those skills. But for 99.999999% of the people, it doesn't pay very well. So eventually you're going to have to get out there and compete.
But unfortunately, because I think you nailed it perfectly, that's exactly what happens. All those other activities take initiative and effort. And so, but now we've primed this generation to lean into not putting in the effort, stick-to-itivism, resilience, grit, all those things that we know are important. So many of our young people lack those ingredients now, and it's not as if it's a switch that you can magically turn on. The kid who's been living on his mom's couch for 15 years isn't going to magically develop grit.
No.
We try in our treatment program to kind of change the course of history, but once you ingrain some of those bad habits, it's really hard to undo. And that's, I think, the message for parenting. It's easier to prevent than to treat. And so if we could prevent some of these issues from happening and be thoughtful, look, it takes a lot more effort to be a tech cautious parent. I know that there were plenty of long drives. It would have been easy to drop the tablet in the backseat of the car when my kids were being noisy or whatever. It takes a lot more effort, but at the end of the day, the reward is greater and it's worth the climb because it's easy. And then let's face it, every parent who uses the digital babysitter, they have that little justification. Well, it's educational. Baby Einstein, and I was told by big tech it's good for them.
Yeah, they wouldn't lie to you, of course. Oh, and by the way, here's the new model every 6 months for you to buy.
Right. Why would Apple lie to us? Right.
But I try to tell parents that the way children form their self-image, their level of self-esteem, their level of self-worth is by observing themselves overcome the challenges and obstacles of life. If they see themselves make the choir or make the team or get out there and form friends and go to a slumber party and get by and go to college and get along with a professor they don't like, et cetera, they observe themselves do that and they attribute to themselves the ability to overcome challenges and adversity. Right. And if you don't require that of them, you cheat them out of the ability to observe that in themselves and attribute the traits, characteristics, and qualities to themselves that, hey, I can do this. I can do that.
Right.
Like you say, it's hard to unring those bells when you've passed those developmental opportunities without seizing on them. And I really worry that we're raising a generation here that's not learning about themselves the way they need to and the way they could.
Well, and at the other end of the parenting continuum, you have the negligent parent, but then you have the, the helicopter parent who is also robbing their child of the opportunity to figure things out for themselves because they're bubble wrapping their kid and they're not allowing them to scrape their elbows and to learn from what they're doing. So all those things that you're talking about are exactly spot on. And that's why in our treatment program, what you talked about overcoming obstacles, we do a hero's journey process where, we're trying to tell our young people who are stuck in digital escapism that you can be the hero, because most video games are the hero's journey in the digital format. So
Right.
it's a protagonist, it's an avatar that's overcoming all these fictitious obstacles. And so we tell our young people, you be the hero in your life. What are the obstacles that you need to overcome, that you need to lean into so you can actually feel a genuine sense of accomplishment, not level 43 in fictitious digital game X, So you're exactly right, is how can we help our young people lean into experiences, lean into establishing resilience and grit and failure and picking themselves up and all those things that some parents are uncomfortable with. So, we have to learn a bit too as the parents and how to better do this as well.
Well, and a lot of these parents are sitting right next to the kid or in the next room, and they're on TikTok or Instagram and doing the very same thing that the kid's doing. So they feel a little hypocritical if they take too hard of a stand.
Right.
And that's a problem. But let me ask in closing, Doctor, what is your advice to a parent or grandparent that's listening right now that has input? Their kid has the smartphone. They are on it more than they need to. We didn't go through all the hours, but they're spending more and more time on these things. They are using them. They've heard what we say and they go, wow, we're who they're talking about. What are first steps that you recommend for them to do? And as you say, if it's extreme, they probably need professional help. They probably need your treatment centers. They probably need to be in there. But for those that want to take first steps, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I think young kids and teenagers, they don't like being told what to do, right? So if you're sort of that nagging parent or grandparent, you get shut out you become that Charlie Brown teacher, wah, 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 in the background.
Yeah.
But I've found that kids respond because they don't like to be manipulated, showing them something like The Social Dilemma, that documentary, which pulled back the curtain from big tech, the engineers of big tech saying, hey, this is how we're manipulating you. And I have had young people respond really positively to, what? I'm being manipulated by these people? It's like, yeah, so you're not being a rebel. You're not a rebel. You're a rebel without a cause right now because you're just being monetized and manipulated. And 14 and 16-year-olds respond to that if you show them
Right.
a well-produced documentary like that can be eye-opening for some of them. Because if you're just going to sort of drone on and on that get off your device, you're going to get shut out eventually. So showing them some of the research, showing them some of the ways that they're being manipulated can be really helpful, in addition to giving them other things to engage in, backdooring some recreational activities, going out for a trip, or if it's camping, or having them join Boy Scouts or Girl, any kind of experience that can backdoor in less time on screens. Without even doing it overtly. They don't even have to know that that's what you're doing, can be helpful.
Yeah, get them where there's no connectivity.
Right. Go to camp, go to some other types of experiences where they don't want to go to a digital detox boot camp, but they might want to go to a surf camp, or they might want to go to, a horse ranch for 6 weeks over the summer. These are things. And by the way, there's no phones allowed, but that's not what you're going there for. You're going there to get a nature experience.
Well, that's great advice.